Hello there, you join me for volume 17. Can you believe it's been that many of Ask a Brit? This, of course, is the format in which you find people from around the world, mainly America, get to ask me questions of any kind mainly about my Britishness or just being a Brit in America or anything you like, really. And all you have to do is put your question in the comments below and use the hashtag AskABrit, just like that, and I will hopefully get to your question in volume 18 coming up next week. Hello, Cat. He's come to join in the fun. Doesn't have any questions for me, though, except for how can I get my food, where is it, when is it? All right, first question, Firecracker3240, you're up first. And you ask, of course, aside from your wife and cat, what America-only things have you found that you absolutely love and can now never imagine living without? The people of America, so people other than my wife. Not all people, let's be clear about that. There are some that I'd rather leave in the gutter. Not the gutter, that could be dangerous. They could starve to death and shiver a lot. But there are people that I've met here who I love and wish I could take with me everywhere. There is a sensibility to people here that is somewhat different to British people, and I marvel at that at times. And I think that the other thing is the landscape. I've said it many times before, you can't really replicate it in most parts of the world. Some of the landscape you can. So some of northern Maine looks a lot like Scandinavia. But the Rockies, for example, I really just, I think once I see that in all its grandeur, I'll never go back. I'm not saying I'll never go back to the Rockies. I mean, I'll never go back to other landscapes. So once you go coffee, you don't go back. It's kind of like that. And your second question, and what things are there in the UK that you just can't get in America that I miss the most? The weather, I think. I mean, I could go out to Portland or Seattle and perhaps replicate it, but certainly here in Chicago, as I've said before, it just doesn't have that same consistency of more or less mild throughout the year. I mean, drizzly, but mild. But just, I can handle that. It's the extremes I don't like. Billy Joel liked to go to extremes. I don't. It's not my cup of tea. Nor is tea, because I don't like it. I prefer coffee. I think we've said that. That's something I'd miss. Obviously, I discovered coffee in America. I know it exists in England, but I think if I left, I'd somehow feel compelled to cut back. And I can't do that. He agrees. The cat always agrees with me. Second question today comes from Susie Q. Have you ever had s'mores with the Cadbury fruit and nut chocolate bar instead of the dreadful Hershey bar? It is dreadful. We've already been over that in the last video. It's not dreadful. I lie. I actually quite like Hershey's chocolate, but that's beside the point. But apparently it's to die for to have Cadbury fruit and nut on a s'more. Anyone who's British, by the way, who's watching this that doesn't know what a s'more is, it's when you get what they call graham crackers, right, and put marshmallow in it and then add a chocolate bar, usually Hershey's. I imagine it's amazing with fruit and nut. I mean, fruit and nut is up there in my top 5, top 7, 10. It's not top 10. But it's close. It's a wonderful chocolate bar. Yeah, I think that sounds amazing, Susie Q, and I'm going to add that to my summer to-do list for next year. Maybe even this year, although we are, of course, coming to the end of summer. I don't want that, although as discussed before, the extremes will subside a little. Fall. I love fall. Dan Brown, not the writer, no relation, but Dan asks, are crackers and cheese a thing in America? From one northerner to another, you can't beat some Jacob's crackers, mature cheddar and Branston pickle. I quite agree, yes, cheese and crackers. Cheese and crackers certainly exist. I've had it at wine tastings before, not to sound elitist. But I've had it at wine tastings here in the US. Outside of that context, though, I'm not sure it's something where people say, for lunch today, I'm just going to eat some crackers and cheese. It seems to be quite underwhelming, that, I think, to a lot of Americans. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've just been hanging around with the wrong Americans, but I'd be interested to know that in the comments. Do you eat crackers and cheese? I think I'm going to go and do that very same thing for lunch. But next question number 4, 50 beyond. Do you like to queue? Well, it's one of the age-old British traditions, or, there's this belief, I think, that Brits like to queue. I don't know that we like queuing, it's just very much ingrained in our culture that we have to queue. One of the reasons that people line up for things more in the UK is that there's just sort of more of us per square mile. You know, the population density in the UK is much larger than it is in most places here in the US, so it will stand out to anyone who's looking at that. But again, I don't think we like to queue up for things. We just have to do it, and so I think after a while we tolerate it. To some extent. 50 Beyond also asks, where are most Brits living in the United States when they come over, expats? They're not like me. They don't start out in somewhere like Indiana for the most part. I mean, of course, some of us do. The big destination, I don't know why I'm doing this radio DJ voice from Australia, seems to be Florida for obvious reasons, but LA as well. So too, I've heard, is Portland and Seattle, so in your neck of the woods. Maybe because they don't want to, like me, long for British weather. They'll just have it right there at their fingertips. Not their fingertips, probably just on their hair, if they're wearing a raincoat. And so, yes, but I will say this is an interesting fact I found out, that the state with the highest concentration of British ancestry, which is obviously a slightly different subject matter, is Utah, and that comes down to Mormonism. Mormons moving over from the UK and settling in Utah, some of whom are my relatives, and I'm going to look them up eventually. Sorry, I just elbowed the cat in the head. You couldn't see that, so you've only got my word to go on, not his. I've admitted cat abuse, that's not good. Next question, Sandra S. I went to London last month and I found an interesting culture there, and I became so curious. Why do Brits all stay standing up outside of the pub instead of going inside holding a beer in each hand? Ooh, that's an odd one. I think I know what you mean. I mean, you know, we do sit inside the pub, for sure. We definitely want to shelter from said weather, but since the smoking ban came in what was it, 2006, 2007, something like that, there has been a prevalence more toward smokers going outside. But of course, because they're going outside, their friends go with them, all right, and passive smoke with them, which is second-hand smoking and all that. And so I suppose congregations outside formed in that capacity. Though saying that, of course, the same thing happened in many cities and states here in the US in the last 10 years, and it doesn't seem to be such a cultural thing here for that to happen. Although I think it's probably fair to say that American pubs tend to have a higher concentration of outdoor seating, perhaps. I'm possibly making that up. My knowledge of pub ownership is very, very slim. But I imagine it's something like that. But yeah, the smoking ban definitely influenced that. Lisa Myth, what is a twiglet? Well, a twiglet, right, it's the most astonishing thing in the world, basically. It's a little crispy stick, right? You get a few of them in a bag. They're like that size, okay? And they're just covered in Marmite, you know. So 50% of the nation love them. 50% are wrong and hate them. But for me, they are one of the best chips, as you can get on this fine planet we call planet Earth. I'm probably overselling it there. I don't have a sponsorship with the makers of Twiglets, just to be clear. And Lisa also asks, what's the deal regarding Brits and bad teeth? Is there a lack of orthodontists? Well, here's a funny thing. If we do have bad teeth, it might be because of the Twiglets, you know, or all of the chocolate that we consume. We can't help it. It's very addictive stuff. But a report that was done a few years ago, and I'm pulling this out of the top of my head, the back of my head, because that's where it ended up. A report was done to show that actually Brits have the healthiest teeth in the entire world. So anybody that says otherwise, that's not me, can go and kiss my art collection in the face. Okay, the next question comes from the Big Fat Mama Diaries. That is definitely YouTube name of the week. And they ask, I watched an interview where Emily Blunt discussed her husband John Krasinski, his mistake of wearing a baseball cap in a British cafe. Apparently they were rude to him. Finally, Emily told him to take the stupid cap off. He did, and they were more friendly to him. Why are baseball caps such a no-no in Britain? You know, having never worn them on a consistent basis, except for when I was 8 and I had a Lightwater Valley one, which is a roller coaster theme park, I couldn't really speak to it. I think that there is this association with baseball caps and chavs. Chavs being, you know, street-dwelling yobs who carry knives with them, then maybe they are seen as somewhat suspicious. I don't know. Or, you know, it looks too American to some people. You know, we can't have any of that nonsense in this establishment. We're British, thank you. So, and they kick you out for being a fool. But I don't know. Yeah, that is an odd one. I don't have a massive, you know, aversion to baseball caps unless they're worn sideways. It's not the early 90s, folks. Get over it, you. Ryan Butler, something I've noticed about myself is that I seem at times to be intimidated by a British accent. Aren't we all? I'm not, because I have one. I don't scare myself. Like on phone calls with software developers and whatnot, I always worry that my clear American accent is going to come across as boorish and negative in some aspect. Have you encountered this, people seeming intimidated by your accent, or is that just a personal hang-up with me? Well, between you and me, Ryan, I believe that everybody should be intimidated by me and my kind, for we do own the planet secretly through our pop culture. But underneath this majestically sexy brogue that emanates from our mouth, some of us are actually quite stupid, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. You know, you think just because I speak like this that I'm Jane Austen or something, right? I'm not. I'm not Jane Austen. Let's be clear about that now. So Ryan, nothing to fear is what I'm saying. You know, hold your own. Yeah, you could take those limey bastards down. Don't do that. We don't want another war, right? Nora F. I've noticed while watching a few TV shows that many Brits refer to what we call the ground as the floor. So he'll fall on the floor when he's actually outside. Is this common or only used in certain areas? You know, I think I personally make a distinction between floor and ground. The floor for me is here inside a building. Ground usually is outside, right? It's the ground of the earth. You know, I think I've heard this before from British people, and it honestly just floors me. That was a pun. I've got to stay grounded in my humour. So, okay, next question comes from Mrs. Froggy. Sounds like Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy had a child. No. What are your favourite American and British bands, Mrs. Froggy asks, old or recent? So I'm a 90s child. I grew up with 90s music, and my favourite 90s band is Pulp. Right, their album Different Class was indeed Different Class. Came out in 1995 when I was just 14. Don't do the maths unless you want to. Also a huge fan, of course, of the Beatles and many others. When you want to talk about American, again I go back to the 90s, probably R.E.M. Remember them? What happened to them? R.E.M. were great. I'm also into Bob Dylan. I don't know why I'm doing this. Just, yeah, lots really. I mean, I could sit here and make an entire list from both countries. I should do a video on my favourite British and American musicians. That's coming soon, so stay tuned. That's another one. I'm hitting all the right notes today, right? You can't beat a good pun, or a bad one, or three in a row like that. And so the final question today comes from Eric Alsman, who asks, why do British TV programmes have such short runs? American shows often run for 10 years or more. Well, I think, Eric, it depends on the show that we're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about Doctor Who, that's been on the airways for 54 years. Coronation Street, I think even longer, right? So the soap operas have done really well. They seem to have a long shelf life because they're out every day and people feel like they are part of that world, so you can't really just cancel on it because then you're cancelling their lives. But actually, when you're talking, I think, about comedies, our comedies tend to have a shorter shelf life. So The Office, you know, 2 seasons, Fawlty Towers 2, and as you mentioned, just a bunch of others that just didn't get as long a run as the potential American counterparts. So the American Office, what was it, 1,200 seasons by the time it was finished? And while we're on the topic, of course, there's a difference between series and seasons. So that's a whole mess in itself. But, you know, just to speak to this idea of why we keep it short, it's often been said that, you know, quality, not quantity. So I don't want to start a flame war with fans of American television, among which I count myself, right? But I am a big fan of the way we do it. Just keep it short and keep it good. Yeah, sometimes they're not good. Sometimes British shows are awful and they shouldn't have had 1 series, never mind 12. That's it for this episode of Ask a Brit. Join me next week for volume 18, and of course if you want your question answered in that. Just go ahead and put your question in the comments section of this video, or any video throughout the week, so long as it's one of mine. Like I said, remember to use the hashtag. If you don't use the hashtag, I can't find your question, and I'll have nightmares about that for weeks, because I'll be like, oh gosh, I didn't answer his or her question, and I'll run out of oxygen. And whip out your phone right now, if indeed you're not on your phone, and follow Lost in the Pond on Instagram. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and you can go to lostinthepond.com. Until next week, cheerio. I'm going to go and stick the air conditioning back on because I'm sweating like a beast.